Natural disasters like tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, and volcanic eruptions can be pretty bad. However, those are nothing more than a reaction to our own actions. We blame Mother Nature for the death of millions. We also think of ourselves as the alpha beings on this planet, as governors and protectors. And yet, every now and then, our own incompetence and stupidity surface and show us we're nothing more than insignificant specks in the grand scheme of things. Not convinced? Well, stay tuned because we're going to count down 15 of the most massive failures in history that should have never happened. Mistakes that still live on in infamy. Number 15, the Jilin chemical explosion. If you play with fire, you're bound to get burned. But in this case, an entire province paid the price. On November 13, 2005, a petrochemical plant in Jilin, China, turned into a war zone. A chain reaction of explosions ripped through the facility, shattering windows 200 meters away. 6 people died, dozens were injured, and thousands were forced to evacuate. But that wasn't the worst part. 100 tons of toxic chemicals, including benzene and nitrobenzene, leaked into the environment. These aren't just dangerous. They're the kind of stuff that can cause leukemia and destroy immune systems. Within hours, 80 kilometers of the Songhua and Amur rivers were coated in toxic sludge, with benzene levels spiking to 108 times the safety limit. And just like that, entire provinces had to shut off their water supplies, leaving millions without clean drinking water. This wasn't just a massive failure, it was a man-made disaster that could have been avoided. Number 14, the North Pacific garbage patch. One man's trash is another man's a floating continent of waste. A gyre is a massive ocean vortex, a spinning trap where water gets stuck. It doesn't mix with surrounding currents, so whatever drifts in, stays in. Back in 1988, scientists warned that human trash dumped into the ocean would eventually pile up in one of these gyres. Now, it was not a prediction, but pure scientific calculations, and they were right. Today, estimates suggest that between 700,000 and 15 million square kilometers of the Pacific Ocean are now covered in a toxic cocktail of plastic, petroleum, and straight-up garbage. That's anywhere from 0.4% to 8.1% of the entire ocean surface, an area so massive it's literally visible from outer space. No wonder sharks hate us. Honestly, if someone dumped their trash can in my home, I'd bite their leg off too. But let's be real, it's our mess. You can't deny that. If you stop throwing trash from your home, one day it will be filled. Number 13. The Great Smog of London. Ignorance is bliss until it starts killing people. In December 1952, Londoners unknowingly walked into one of history's deadliest air pollution disasters. As temperatures dropped, residents burned more coal to stay warm, pumping thick black smoke into the air. Unfortunately, an anticyclone settled over the city, trapping pollutants in place. For 4 days, the streets of London were swallowed by toxic smog so dense that people couldn't see their own feet. Life went on until hospitals started filling up. 4,000 people died prematurely, and another 100,000 developed severe respiratory illnesses. It wasn't until months later, when doctors analyzed medical records, that the full scale of the disaster became clear. The Great Smog remains a brutal lesson in environmental mismanagement, proving that sometimes what you can't see can kill you. Number 12. The Minamata disease. What happens when a factory treats an ocean like a trash can? Well, disaster. In the mid-20th century, residents near Minamata Bay, Japan, started exhibiting bizarre neurological symptoms: loss of motor control, convulsions, and speech impairments. At first, people feared a mysterious contagion. Patients were isolated, homes were sterilized, and those affected were socially shunned. But this wasn't an infection. It was mercury poisoning, courtesy of Chiso Corporation. For 34 years, the chemical factory dumped industrial waste directly into Minamata Bay, contaminating the fish supply and poisoning the entire community. By 2001, 2,265 victims were officially recognized, most of them already dead. Another 10,000 received financial compensation, but the true death toll remains unknown. Minamata remains a grim reminder that corporations will ignore human life to save $1 until someone forces them to pay up. Number 11. The Sidoarjo Mud Volcano. Nature creates disasters, but leave it to humans to make them even worse. Mud volcanoes usually form because of seismic activity, but that wasn't dramatic enough for us. Instead, we went ahead and created our own. Meet the only man, PT Lapindo Brantas, an Indonesian drilling company that ignored multiple warnings and pushed forward with an excavation project in an unstable area, right near the Ring of Fire. Drilling reactivated old fault lines, and a 6.3 earthquake just made things worse. A few days later, the drill hole erupted, shooting mud 200 meters into the air. That was in 2006. It's still spewing today and could continue for the next 25 to 30 years. At its peak, this man-made disaster was dumping 180,000 cubic meters of mud into the ocean every single day. Mud isn't toxic, but it's not drinkable either. It has contaminated surrounding waters, displaced thousands of people, and continues to destroy wildlife. Number 10. The Gulf War oil spill. War is already bad enough, but somehow humans found a way to make it worse. During the Gulf War, Iraq came up with what they thought was a brilliant military strategy: dump 720,000 cubic meters of oil into the Persian Gulf to make it harder for US forces to land. So, was it a genius plan? Well, of course not, but in their mind, it was a perfect one. That insane decision turned into one of the worst environmental disasters in human history. The spill was so massive, cleaning it up was basically impossible, and, surprise, surprise, Iraq didn't exactly rush to fix what they broke. The oil sank into the seabed, poisoning everything. Some local species straight up disappeared, and 21 years later, the ecosystem is still struggling to recover. Mother Nature is tough, but even she wasn't ready for this level of human stupidity. All right, now let's move to number 9, Chernobyl. When we're talking about massive failures, this one is just insane. And let's be real, you've probably heard the stories. April 26, 1986, Chernobyl, Ukraine. A routine safety test turned into one of the worst man-made disasters in history. Reactor 4 exploded, spewing radioactive chaos into the sky. The Soviet government tried to cover it up, but the damage was already done. The immediate death toll? 31 people. The real toll? A nightmare that never ended. Radiation exposure led to birth defects, cancer, and entire families wiped out by an invisible killer. Even today, the reactor site is so toxic that it will remain uninhabitable for thousands of years. Chernobyl sits in a league of its own, one of only 2 Level 7 nuclear disasters, the other being Fukushima in 2011. Pripyat, once a thriving town, now stands frozen in time. A chilling reminder of what happens when recklessness, secrecy, and science mix in all the wrong ways. Number 8. The door to hell. How do you deal with a gas leak? Well, you set it on fire forever. In 1971, Soviet scientists were drilling in Derwez, Turkmenistan, hoping to tap into a rich gas reserve. But instead, the ground beneath them collapsed, forming a massive crater. Worse, methane started leaking into the atmosphere, posing an environmental disaster. So, did they cap it? Nope. Their solution? Light it on fire. They assumed it would burn out in a few days. That was over 50 years ago, and it's still going strong. aka the door to hell. This glowing inferno is now one of Turkmenistan's biggest tourist attractions. Ironically, the same gas that fuels this fire could have been a valuable energy source, but now it's just burning away into nothing. A monument to scientific miscalculation, the world's longest-lasting industrial accident, and a perfect symbol of Soviet problem-solving. Number 7. The Love Canal Toxic Landfill. Ever wonder what happens when you build a neighborhood on top of a chemical dump? Well, at least, nothing good. Welcome to Love Canal, Niagara Falls, New York, a neighborhood built on a time bomb. In the 1940s, Hooker Chemical used this land as a dumping ground for toxic waste. But when a housing boom hit, the city needed land, and Hooker reluctantly sold it. What could go wrong? Answer: everything. Families moved in, a school was built, and soon the ground itself began leaking poison. Birth defects, rare diseases, and mysterious illnesses spread like wildfire. Still, the government ignored it until journalists blew the story open in 1978. Despite the headlines, action came too little, too late. Only in 1995 did a judge finally rule in favor of the victims, leading to evacuations and a massive cleanup. Love Canal remains one of America's worst environmental disasters, a case study of what happens when corporate negligence meets government incompetence. Number 6. The Libby, Montana asbestos contamination. Libby, Montana, a small town that thrived on vermiculite mining thanks to the W.R. Grace plant. From 1919 to 1990, it pumped out jobs, prosperity, and tons of asbestos-laced dust. Back then, people didn't know that asbestos destroys the lungs, heart, and body from the inside out, but the company did. For decades, chimneys belched toxic particles, coating homes, playgrounds, and even the local school track in microscopic death. Residents unknowingly used mine tailings for driveways and gardens, embedding asbestos deep into their daily lives. By the time the mine shut down, it was too late. Libby itself was contaminated. The result? Over 200 deaths and thousands suffering from asbestos-related diseases. Today, warning signs litter the town, a grim reminder of how corporate greed poisoned an entire community and got away with it for 70 years. Number 5. The death of the Aral Sea. Once the fourth largest lake in the world, the Aral Sea was a thriving ecosystem until the Soviet Union decided to reroute its rivers for agriculture in 1960. They planned to divert water, irrigate crops, and then restore the lake later. But that never happened. The canals they built leaked horribly, losing up to 75% of the water before it even reached the fields. By 2004, the Aral Sea had shrunk to just 25% of its original size, turning into a barren wasteland. But it gets worse. Toxic pesticides, fertilizers, and salt deposits now poison the land, air, and water, causing massive health crises. Sandstorms whip up toxic dust, leading to birth defects, miscarriages, and skyrocketing illness rates. All of this was just so the USSR could export more cotton. The Aral Sea wasn't just drained, it was sacrificed in the name of Soviet ambition. What a mess. Number 4. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill. If there's one thing worse than an oil spill, it's an oil spill that takes 87 days to stop. April 20th, 2010, Deepwater Horizon, an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico, exploded and sank. An open drill hole, spewing oil like a bullet wound in the ocean floor. Over the next 87 days, it dumped 780,000 cubic meters of crude oil straight into the Gulf. 7 people died, and scientists considered using a nuclear explosion to seal the well, because apparently, the biggest oil spill in history wasn't making headlines enough. They wanted to add nukes to the mix. The damage? Insane. The spill threatened 8,332 marine species, including many already endangered. Years later, the nightmare continued. Mutated fish, oil washing up on beaches, poisoned ecosystems. The oil sank deep into the food chain, turning the entire Gulf into a slow-burning health crisis. It wasn't just an oil spill, it was a full-blown environmental catastrophe, and one we'll be paying for generations. Number 3. The Guiyu e-waste dump. Out with the old, in with the new, except the old never really disappears. Guiyu, China, is the world's largest e-waste dump, a 52 square kilometer graveyard for discarded electronics. iPhones, Galaxy S4s, and every outdated gadget you can think of end up buried here. While e-waste makes up a small fraction of global trash, it holds 70% of all heavy metals in landfills. Over time, toxic materials leak into the air, land, and water, contaminating everything, including rice crops. Children in Guiyu have 54% higher lead levels in their blood compared to kids in nearby towns. As if that's not bad enough, workers burn piles of electronics to extract precious metals, releasing even more pollutants. Soil tests near recycling sites found 371 times more lead and 115 times more copper than areas just 30 kilometers away. E-waste pollution is one of the fastest growing global crises. Next time you toss out an old phone, remember, it doesn't just disappear. Number 2. The Baya cyanide spill. Gold mining company Aurel, a joint venture between Australia's Esmeralda Exploration and the Romanian government, used cyanide to extract gold. But handling toxic chemicals requires actual responsibility, something they clearly lacked. On January 30th, 2000, a dam wall ruptured near Baia Mare, spilling 100,000 cubic meters of cyanide-contaminated water into farmlands and the Somesh River. The poison traveled through Europe's waterways, eventually reaching the Danube River. The impact? 80% of aquatic life in Serbia's Tisa River died, wiping out 62 fish species, including 20 under protection. In Hungary, 2.5 million people lost access to safe drinking water overnight. This was the second worst environmental disaster in European history, right behind Chernobyl, and all because of corporate negligence disguised as gold mining. Number 1. The Bhopal gas leak. Some mistakes you can fix, others haunt history forever. In 1984, a pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, turned into a death trap when 30 metric tons of methyl isocyanate gas spilled into the air. The Union Carbide India Limited plant had been a disaster waiting to happen. It's all because safety violations stacked up for years, ignored until it was too late. Then on December 3rd, a safety release system kicked in and dumped an entire storage tank of poison straight into the atmosphere. What followed was 100% pure horror. A toxic cloud swallowed Bhopal and its neighboring areas, suffocating thousands in their sleep. The official death toll was told that it's 3,787, but the real number is likely over 8,000, with countless survivors battling permanent health issues. This wasn't just a failure, it was corporate negligence at its deadliest. If you've enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you very soon.